So just like we use any latest version of Python for our bead and all of them work well, we're still going to use PyCharm and Python for most of the Spark related things. But for Kafka, what we do is we just get any latest version and we install it on the root. It's going to be quite straightforward. It works based on the operating system. Of course, you will see that Mac seems to be much better. Mac and Linux seems to be much better because they have proper um, RPMs to do the installation. Windows is a bit jerky. So when you go to the official Kafka download tool, this is what you will be looking at. So it's a zip file. You can pick any version. You remember, if we remember, with Bead we stuck to 2.12 because there was one or two bugs in Scala 2.13. So in the Bead class, we said we will stick to Scala version 2.12 throughout the course. So I'm going to stick to the same thing here as well. So you can see it's a G compressed tar file. So it's a GZ. So you just download this copy. So the latest version that is running around now is 3.50. So you're going to take that, and it's a big zip file. And you can actually put it on any root. Because my C drive is almost full, I've done it on the D drive. So you can see this is the Kafka tool here. And if you remember, in Bead, I was very much insisting that you should use 7-zip because these are all Linux tools. They don't work well on your Windows zip tool. So I've encouraged you not to use Windows zip tool, but to use 7-zip. Same rules here as well. Okay? So when you unzip the Kafka file, please do not use the Windows zip tool because it's got some differences on file naming conventions and file formats. So it's always safer to go via 7-zip. And then of course it is a double extraction because it's a gzip compression. So you can say extract here and you will see that it creates another zip file. Then again you have to say extract here, and that it creates a Kafka folder for you. So that's how the uncompression goes. It's quite straightforward. It usually has the version number. So in my case you can see it's 2.12 for Scala and 3.50 for Kafka. Both versions are being mentioned on the file. I usually don't like these version numbers because it's very difficult to put it inside the path and other things. So what I will usually do is I'll just rename this to a very simple Kafka. Okay? So I'll drop the version number and keep it just as Kafka so that it's easy for me to navigate and put inside the path. So let me open up and show you. Assume that I've renamed it into Kafka, which is this folder. So if you look into the folder setup, I don't think this is visible, but let me see if I can increase the font size. No, okay, so I'll use the magnifier instead. I hope it helps me, not hinders. What am I supposed to do? I have to get the magnifier, maybe. Okay, not bad. But how do I scroll? Okay, so you can see the folder structure like this: bin, config, libraries, licenses, logs, and site docs. This is how the folder structure is. So if you look into the bin folder, there's a lot of shell scripts. So if you're a Mac user or a Linux user, this is the processes that you should run. So to start a soft Kafka server, you say Kafka server start. To start your Zookeeper, you'll say Zookeeper server start. The command syntax is quite straightforward. But for Windows user, you can't use shell script. So they have a subfolder called Windows. So you go into the Windows, you will see that you have all the batch files instead. So instead of shell script, they've given you batch files. So Windows user will be using these scripts to start. So what this means is your path should have Kafka bin Windows inside the user's environment variables. Okay? So that's the only setup that you got to do for the Kafka to work from the command prompt. Okay? So point your path folder to this folder, you're done. That's the only key thing. It's not as sophisticated as the Bead class. Bead class, you got to set up Java home, Scala home, Spark home, Hadoop home. All that is reduced here. It's only additional tool is Kafka. So just set up the Kafka home, put it inside the path, you're done. And so these are the two additional variables that you need. Okay, so there's one more thing that I want you to look at, which is called as the config. So the config folder of Kafka has got a few interesting things. One is the Zookeeper setting. The other is the Kafka server setting. Okay? So to control anything, see, you remember I was talking about this configuration, that configuration. The easiest way to do configuration for these things is to come pick the right property file, edit them. That's how the very simple core version of Kafka works. So if I want to customize Zookeeper, all I got to do is take the Zookeeper's configuration file. It's a very simple key value file which you can scroll in your, I'll go back to 100%, this seems readable. So this is your default setup. Okay. So you can see that there is the client to the Zookeeper. Port number is 2181. You will be using that. And of course, you can see that the data directory is temporary/Zookeeper. Okay. Watch this. This is where all your checkpoints, your audits, your logs, and all these things are going to be stored. Okay. So this folder is important for Zookeeper to keep all the metadata tables. Something gets corrupted, you just may have to come here. Because we are just beginners, we don't want to do sophisticated configs. You delete this folder, then you recreate it again. Okay. Because Windows doesn't allow very nice way of handling deletion. Mac users can use a tool to do the deletion, but here Windows user, the file writes is always a problem. We have funny things like right click and run as administrator, right? That nonsense is creating trouble. So that's why you can't do delete topics inside Windows. So the alternate is to come here and delete the whole directory and then recreate your topics. So that's the only way with which we can use the non-managed server. So that's a very dirty hack, but we don't have a choice. The server settings is also interesting. This is again a key value pair, as you can see. They've got all the interesting things. Usually you will see that the server listener is commented like this, hash plain text. Okay. I usually like to probe the logs because if something goes wrong, you want to see what's going wrong, you will have to troubleshoot the logs. So enable your listeners by uncommenting this inside the server properties. So that's the only additional configuration that you got to do. And if you scroll down here also, you will see that there is a default directory which is the same temp Kafka logs. So this is where it is going to create all the servers, bootstrap servers checkpoint, any kind of offset partition details, and any other configuration settings for your topics. All these are remembered here. Okay. So you'll see that the /temp folder is where it keeps all the logs. To me, the temp folder is right on the C drive because I've just left the default as such. But if you don't like the C to have the temp because you think there's no space there, you can change that to D:/temp, whatever folder you want, or E, whatever drive you want. Okay. So these are the key configurations that you got to understand when we deal with Kafka server. Okay. So one is the bin folder where all the batch files are. So you got to put it inside the path. I've already done that, but I'm going to show you how it is done. So if you go into the environment variables, if you go into the details of the environment variables, you can see that we already did Hadoop last time. So we pointed that to WinUtils. The same way, we also did Java Home. We made sure that we have a Java version 11 running and it is pointed. The same way, we also had a Spark Home, which basically points to the Spark installation folder. So when you take the Spark Home and say edit, you will see that it is pointing to Spark 331 version that we used. So these are the variables that we set in B class. The only additional one is here Kafka Home. So in my case, it is D drive/Kafka. That's it. Okay, so I create a variable called Kafka Home and I point it to the Kafka's folder, so which is D. Then in addition, I got to take the path, I got to edit, and then I make sure that the Kafka folder is inside the path here. So you can see that in one of my path variables, I would have said D Kafka bin Windows because Windows is going to run the batch file. It has to be this B Kafka bin batch files folder. Okay. So Kafka Home and this path are the two new things you got to do to make sure that the Kafka works. So if this is done, your Kafka is ready to. Okay. So Kafka has a prerequisite. Only if your JDK is running, your Kafka runs. So if you want to start testing your Kafka, I would suggest please right click and use the administrator. Never forget this. Okay. So if you don't use the administrator, it gives you bizarre errors that you never expect and you'll be wasting time. So with this funny Windows operating system, we have no choice. Every time make sure you run it in the administrator. Even PyCharm, make sure you run it on the administrator. Okay. So the first thing you got to test is what is my Java version. So you can say what Java version, and because we have JDK 11 running this time, so this year I think we upgraded to 11, so you see 11. You can also check the Scala version if you want. For sure it is 2.12, but you can counter check the version. So you can see it is running at 2.12. You can also check your Python version, but double dash remember. So by right, if you're taking the latest copy of Python, it's going to be somewhere 3.11.4, 3.11.1, whatever. As long as it's 3 plus, 3.6 plus, it should be fine. You don't make a big fuss about the Python version. So if all these three compilers are working, then we are ready to try Kafka servers. Only JDK, only JDK. But you got to sort the version right. If you're using 12, you got to get the 12 version downloaded. You got the 13 because internally it still uses Scala, just like Spark. So the dependency is exactly Java plus Scala. Make sense? So it's exactly like Spark framework. It's written using Java and Scala. So it has a compatibility. That's why when you go and download the zip, you have to download the right Scala version, 2.12 or 2.13. So there's a JDK and a Scala dependency. Of course, Python you can ignore until tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to use PySpark, so that's why I had to test it. And don't worry about the steps. I push in the video, you can actually replay this any number of times that you want. Okay, so I'm recording this. So that part, please don't worry. I just want to make sure that the fonts are big. Sometimes it's irritating to have a smaller font size. Okay, so that's pretty much on the shell that you got to check. Okay, so I'm using an administrative rights window. So the way that you start your script is very simple. All the commands that I'm going to use is already in the GitHub. So this is the GitHub version we will be using. The same GitHub that we use, Surya R Asai, and the repository is called Arts 2023. So all the code demos that I'm going to show for this lab from today, tomorrow, day after, most of the things you'll find it inside. So of course I'll keep changing some things, but you will see that all the codes that I do in the class basically comes from this repository. So I'm going to copy this repository and send it to you as a message, so all of you have a copy of what we are trying to look at in case you want to parallelly look at the code and try something. So let me make sure that I send a message to all of you on this. I'm at a funny age where some periods of time I need my spectacles, sometimes I don't. The problem is I don't know when I want and when I don't know. Until then I cannot see the fonts. I realize, oh my god. Okay. So let me message you the architecture. So you have, so subject is Git and I'm sending you the Git link. So you would have received the Git link, so you can see that. So what I'm trying to demonstrate this evening is just command line tools, and you'll find all the command lines inside the CLI. So CLI is the short form for command line interface. So we're going to use the command line to see how the Kafka works. So you'll have a very simple way to see how the Kafka works. Okay, so let me increase the font size so we can read it directly here. So the first thing that you got to do is to start your Zookeeper version. So all you do is you say Zookeeper start. It's a batch file. You got to configure the properties. So you can see I'm pointing it to Zookeeper properties, the file that I just now was talking about. So I go back to my shell, and then of course I'm going to put this script inside, and I'm going to say please start the default setup for Zookeeper. So what happens is immediately Zookeeper property is missing. Okay, because it's not C drive and I ran out of space, I have to be using D drive in this case. Okay. So you can see that the Zookeeper immediately starts, and how do you know that it has done a good job is you will see that it starts the Zookeeper server, and by the time the last message will be Zookeeper's audit message. So if you see this, you know that the Zookeeper is running perfectly fine. Then what you do is you open up another shell as an administrator. Of course, I'll send you the instructions as well, not to worry. In this case, you're going to start the server. So I'm going to use the server instruction. Okay, maybe I'll pick it up from the memory here. So the server instruction is Kafka server batch file. Start with the D server properties. Okay, so which is the next command here. If you have installed it in C drive, that's the C drive. If it's a D drive, you've got to point it to the D drive. So that's how it starts. So I've used a second window to start my server. And it's also quite fast, as you can see. As long as the zookeeper is running, you can see that the server started. So it only took like less than 16 millisecond, not bad. And you can see it has a message that says Kafka server has started. So if you see this, it means you have successfully ran your Kafka setup in the non-managed version. Okay. So you have two windows. One window will be running the zookeeper. The other window will be actively running the server. You have to have this running throughout whenever you want to play with Kafka. Okay. So this is how the non-managed version works. So I'm going to minimize these two so they are both running. My next job is to show you how producer and consumer is going to interact. Okay. So I'm going to simulate something to show you how this works. I'll start with the very simple command line prompt as well. Okay. So let me resize this so that I can have multiple of this running. Okay. So I can show in parallel how the messages go back and forth. So I'm going to have a very simple resized window here. So CLS. The first thing is I want to see how many topics are currently there. I've just now installed. So I'm sure that there is not going to be much topics left. Okay. If you're not very sure, what you can do is you can go and delete the temp directory if you want. Okay. So I remember I tested one topic before coming here, but other than that, there should not be anything. So how do you go about listing it? You have to look for the script called Kafka Topics. So this is the one that you will often work when you want to work with Kafka Topics. Okay. So when you say Kafka Topics.batch file, so this is basically the file that you want to run. And when you want to list all the topics, you just say dash dash list. Okay? And then you got to point to the bootstrap server. So this is a constant string that you will be using in most of your commands. So I'm bored of typing, I'm copying that. So you just say bootstrap server 1992. I don't know why they have to repeat themselves like this, but that's how the syntax is. Unfortunately, if you change the sequence, sometimes you don't see things. So on the other, what I mean is if you say Kafka topics, bootstrap, then you say dash dash list, at times the server gets confused. So my recommendation is give your instructions first, then point to the server as the last part. Your properties for the server can always be the last. So you can see there's no current topics. You can also look into the offset tool that I spoke about. So if you install the offset explorer that I spoke about, it's a very simple installation tool. So you can see that it works like this. You can say that this is the local cluster. You can right click and say connect to the cluster. So immediately it makes an active connection. There are only one broker in my system currently. There are 0 topics. There are no consumers. Okay. So it's a very simple tool that helps me to see how many topics are currently there and how people are consuming messages from these topics. So it's a very simple administrative tool. You can't compare this to your Confluent tool or your Docker based managed services. Okay. So it's a very simple dummy tool, but it's good enough for beginners. Now my idea is to create a topic. So I'm going to go back and look for the instructions to create a topic. So let's say I want to create a topic with certain kind of partition. So I'm going to copy this command. I'm going to put it inside the window. So I'm saying create a topic. Call the first topic seems a very funny name because these days the underscore is usually not preferred. I'll just simply call it as first topic without underscore. I'm creating 3 partitions. I'm creating one replication factor with the same cluster details. Okay, so I just give this command and you can see that it immediately gets the topic done, and usually it prompts me that the topic is being created. Okay, it takes a bit of time, but you can see that it goes in and creates a topic and lets me know that the topic is done. In the meanwhile, if you're impatient, you can come here and of course you can reconnect and see if the topics are created. So if you give it a little bit of time, you'll be able to see that inside the topics. Wow, I don't know why it's so long. Normally it's faster. Let me see if the server is still running. Yeah, seems to be okay. Is the zookeeper running? Yeah, that also seems to be okay. So I should get a topic soon. Let's see. I don't know why I got disconnected. Maybe I'll keep it simple. I won't go for partitions, replication factor. I'll just say create. Let me see if it is created. Sometimes it wants me, but it still creates. Let's see. Not created. Okay. So I'll go back and keep it simple. Just say, I suspect something wrong with my syntax. So let me abort this and check because I did create topics today afternoon. So I should have some command somewhere. Works right. Yeah, you see, I was just created this before lunch. Trades, create partitions. I don't know why. You just have to give it the topic. You have to just say create. You can put in any number of partition and replication factor. Something is wrong. I think I did not restart properly or I've done something stupid. Maybe I'm opening the property file somewhere which is not supposed to be open. So what happens is when you run this, usually it creates topic, and of course you can actually start trying producer and consumer groups. That's exactly what I wanted to demo. So I want to create a topic so that I'll be able to show you how producer and consumer works. Okay. So I really hope this goes through so that I can continue my demo. Otherwise, I'll continue tomorrow morning. And normally this should not give me trouble at all. So it's quite easy. I don't know why I think I sort of corrupted somehow. Maybe I'll try a new window, see if it goes through. Something is wrong. Okay. So in case of such situations, what I usually do is this only happens in Windows. I don't ask me why. It's very funny. So what I do is I usually stop my servers here, and I have to do this temp file deletion. So I come in and I know that there's some metadata that's corrupted. So I'll usually clear my temp folders and then restart. So usually that does the trick for me. Let's see if this goes through. So zookeeper started, no trouble. So started, no trouble. Okay. So this is my third window. Try again. Create a topic. Yeah, you see. So somehow the thread issues are there. If I did not restart my machine for a long time, somehow there's a thread conflict. Very, very funny. Doesn't happen in my Linux machine, only happens in Windows. So it's to do something with the file access structure. I can't put my fingers, but it happens, so please be wary of it. So now if you come back here and look at the topics, you will see that it is created. Okay, aha, now I can go back and do some fun stuff. See, what happens is I want to show you how the producer and consumer, it's very interesting to see that via command line. So that's why I'm sort of holding you to see the demo here. So let's say you want to produce something. Okay? So I'm going to write a producer directly on the command line version. So this is the command. So I'm going to create a Kafka console producer. I'm going to produce some messages to this topic called trades. Okay? And of course, you can see that it is ready to accept inputs. In the meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something funny. I'm going to create another administrative window here, and I'm going to write a consumer part. Okay? So I'm going to do the consumer for the same messages so you can see in parallel how this producer and consumer is going to work. So I'm going to pick the consumer console consumer message. I'm sure there's one in the buffer. Okay? And the topic I'm going to listen to is trades again. Okay? So there's a consumer that's ready to listen here. Okay? So in my producer, I start producing simple messages and you see how the consumer reacts here. Wow, why is it so funny? Wow, what happened? Okay, so I'm going to put in the messages. You'll see this is a funny demo. So you'll see, I started the producer again. Okay, so I should be starting the consumer, right? So let's try Control C here. Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna do the console consumer. Console consumer. I think we should be listening to the topic. Let's say just traits. I won't go into consumer groups first. Okay? So I'm just going to listen to this topics traits. And you see whatever messages that I have put in the past doesn't come here. Okay? So the consumer will start working only from the time in which it is being triggered. That's the beauty here. And suppose if I go back and start putting messages, hi, and you will see that then it starts coming in. So, oh, did I fire the command? No. Okay, so you can see that it comes in. So again, I go back here, say something stupid and funny. So you can see that it all comes here. And that's how the console consumer works. Just to keep you interesting, keep the whole thing interesting, you can also say, I want to start from the earliest. Okay? So if you want to get the messages from the earliest, not from the current one, what you can do is you can say consumer first, then you can say from the beginning. Okay? So I'll also start using this group, and then of course you can see how the different commands work. So I'll copy this message. I'll open a new consumer. Okay, so CLS. So you can see that I'm going to paste this, but I will do changes. The topic is called trades. Okay. And I'm going to group this. I'm going to call this as my group. Keep it simple. Okay. So I'm going to call this as my group trades. Group is called as my group. And you can see that I want to read the messages from the beginning and of course the same server. So the moment I give in this consumer, whatever was the past messages is completely read. So this is how the offset is controlled. And what is interesting is you can open another consumer, log to the same group. You will see that randomly the messages are distributed. There is no guarantee that the first producer's message will come to the first one in the consumer. So you can see the randomness. As you keep typing in messages into your producer, even though both of them are inside the same group, it's not divided equally. So that's where the distribution and quorum elections and other things come in. So there's no guarantee of order. Always remember that. So don't take developers are used to thinking in sequence. This is a bit of unlearning. That's the only tricky part about Kafka. Everything else is straightforward. There's no ordering guaranteed. Depends on the partition. You can go to any partition. It can be consumed by anyone inside the same consumer group. Okay? So you can actually try multiple windows for yourself and then gain an understanding. This one doesn't even need to build a client. You can do that using just the CLI and see for yourself. So just create a producer, start consuming it. You'll see the consumer starts at different offsets. You want to move the offset, you got to say the different settings from the beginning, from this timestamp. Okay? And then of course you can create more than one CLI to the same consumer group. As the producer comes, you will see that it goes to one of the random consumer groups. You can see all these things just in the windows itself. So if you understand this much, I think we should not overload your brain for